Okay, so the second speaker of this session is Kris Jensen from UCL, and he's going to talk about models of planning in the frontal cortex. Thank you for being here with us.
Cool. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear? Sound is good? Cool. Yeah, I'll be talking about this work that I've been doing with Tim Behrens at the Sainsbury Wellcome Center, which is part of UCL, where we've been trying to think about the types of algorithms that might be implemented in frontal cortex to help us plan in sequential decision-making tasks. And a lot of this work is really inspired by work on sequence memory tasks, like the ones James was telling us all about 2 days ago, because we know that frontal cortex is involved in these sequence memory tasks, and we also know that it's important for planning. But really, our hypothesis is that at the end of a planning process, what you have left is essentially a sequence memory task. And so I'll just quickly illustrate this. Imagine you're this mouse. And I tell you that if you go through this sequence of states, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then you'll get an ice cream, which is nice because we're in Rome and it's sunny and warm. Alternatively, I could tell you that there's an ice cream in the upper right corner, and you might, through a OK, cool. You might, through a process of planning, realize that am I pressing the wrong thing? All right, we're back. Through a sequence of planning, you might realize that if you take this sequence of steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right, then you'll get to the ice cream. And so at the end of me having told you, go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you realizing it yourself, what is left is just you having this plan in mind of what should happen in the future. And so our hypothesis is that, that really the substrate of planning should be these types of representations that we see in sequence working memory, and the result of planning should be such a representation that tells you what to do. So let's start by reviewing this literature. And this is an experiment that James also told us about 2 days ago, recorded by Xie et al., when they asked a monkey to saccade sequentially to 3 locations. And the way it worked was that the monkey saw 3 locations on a screen, location 1, location 2, then location 3. And then there was the delay period. And after this delay period, the monkey had to saccade first to location 1, then location 2, then location 3. And so now, if we look at what goes on during this delay period, when the monkey has to keep this whole sequence in mind, and we look at the front part of the brain of the monkey, what Xie et al. Found was this conjunctive representation of space and time, where there was one subspace of neurons that represented the location of target 1, a separate subspace of neurons, an orthogonal subspace that represented the location of target 2, and a third subspace that represented the location of target 3. And so there was this simultaneous representation of the entire future all at once, which is very different from what we see in a lot of the planning algorithms that we typically think about in neuroscience. A recent study by Mohamed El Gabi in Tim Behrens' lab found something similar in a spatial navigation task, where after exploring an environment, the animal knew what sequence of states it had to move through to get a reward. And again, they found that there was this representation when one subspace, the animal represented where it was now, in a separate subspace where it was going to be, and then in a separate subspace where it would be after that, and so on and so forth. So importantly, these are not 3 different time points, right? This is a single time point, and it's 3 different slices through neural activity. And so at a single point in time, the neurons represent the entire future of the animal. And for simplicity, I'll just think of each of these little boxes as a neuron, but they could be linear combinations of neurons. So let's think about how you could implement an algorithm like this for a sequence working memory task. One option is to use attractor dynamics. And so you can imagine each of these subspaces being a separate continuous attractor that can store a location in space. And the way to do that is to wire it up such that there's this local excitation within these different states, and then intermission across states. And if you set your parameters correctly, then you can reach a regime where once you've put input into a particular location, then it will stay there and reach a stable fixed point of the dynamics. And now if you have 3 different attractors, you can put 3 different locations in 3 attractors, and that will tell you what you need to do in the future. However, if we're in a world with structures such as physical space, then it seems strange to represent these different futures independently, because we know that I couldn't possibly move from the lower left corner to the upper right corner in one time step. That's too far. And so maybe it would make more sense to correlate these different subspaces, and instead say I should have a single attractor, right? But that single attractor should store a whole set of paths that are feasible through space and time. And so now, instead of wiring up neighbors just in space, I wire up neighbors in space and time, so that this neuron here is connected to this neuron because it's one step away in space and also one step away in time. And this allows you to construct a network where the fixed points of the networks are these paths, right? They're complete paths from point A to point B. And we'll add one more ingredient, which is inhibition across time of the same location in space. So we're saying this guy, the lower middle neuron, inhibits the lower middle neuron at other points in time. And this means that now we're constructing a network that stores non-crossing paths, right? Because I can't return to the same location again. So why might we want to do this? Why might this be useful instead of doing this kind of independent representation we had before? Well, this confers noise robustness, right? Say I all of a sudden lost activity in my middle subspace, I can recover it by filling in my path, because that's the only location in which I can have activities such that I'm at a fixed point of my network dynamics, because it's the only way to construct a path from my beginning to my goal. And so now we have the ingredients of a planning algorithm, right? Because say I know where I'm starting from, right? I'm starting from over here where the mouse is, and I know where I'm going to. I'm going to the ice cream shop to get an ice cream. I can provide input to where I am and where I'm trying to go. That'll cause activity to increase, and then through these attractor dynamics, I will converge to one of these paths, which is a solution to the planning problem that takes me from where I am at time point 1 at state A to where I'm trying to go at time point 3 at state ice cream shop. Okay, and so this is the intuition, and we can write this down in equations that basically say that the activity of a neuron at any given point in time changes according to the recurrent network dynamics. A neuron gets input from all of its neighbors in space and time, and potentially external input if it's the current location or the goal. And it gets inhibition from all of the other locations within the same subspace, which says I can only be at one location at any given point in time. And it gets inhibition from all of the same locations in different subspaces, which says I'm going to store non-crossing paths. And if I wire up my network this way, we can show that provided that inhibition is strong enough, but not too strong, then all possible paths through space and time between my initial location and my target location are going to be fixed points of the network dynamics. And so if I can kick my network into the basin of attraction of one of these fixed points, then the relaxation of the network dynamics will solve my planning problem. And so far, I've kind of assumed that I knew how long it was going to take me to reach the goal, which is annoying, but it turns out you can actually take that assumption away and just provide input that says I want to reach my goal at any time in the future, and we still have the correct fixed points under the same assumptions. And so again, importantly, I just want to stress this. This sequence of subspaces here is an instantaneous representation of an entire future, right? I have an explicit representation of where I'm going to be at every single point in time, which is different from something like a successor representation, which is an average over the future. Now what happens when I move? This is a problem, right? Because now my input is in the wrong locations. I'm not in a fixed point of my attractor dynamics anymore. But because I've moved, then I'm going to get input where I am now, and that's going to shift the attractor landscape such that the new fixed points of my dynamics are the remainder of my path, right? And so I can solve my planning problem, which gives me this structure that tells me what I should do at any point in time. And as I move through my plan, the attractor landscape itself will morph to accommodate my change in position. Cool, and so what that looks like in a slightly larger environment is something like this. I realize this might be hard to see for people in the back, but just try your best. Anyway, so you start here, right, at this location that the mouse is at, and you're trying to reach the ice cream shop at the top right corner to buy an ice cream and cool down. And so initially at time t equals 1, I haven't solved the planning problem yet. I haven't even started. And it turns out, so before I told you that we have the right fixed points, there's also the problem of convergence. It turns out that you can get good convergence if you have two regimes of the dynamics, an initial exploratory regime with low inhibition, and then a regime with high inhibition where you relax your network dynamics. Okay, so basically I enter this exploratory regime where activity spreads from the current location and the goal location because that's where I get input. And then inhibition kicks in, and that starts resolving this set of possible paths into the ones that actually take me to the goal until I relax to one of these fixed points, which we know from before are these paths that take me from where I am now to where I'm trying to go in the future. And so this is a form of amortized planning algorithm where it's not like in a sequential rollout algorithm where I look at different possible paths in sequence and then select a good one. It's also not like a successor representation, which would be kind of like an exponentially weighted average of this t equals 2 slice across the different subspaces. But instead, it's this kind of inference algorithm over neural representations that looks like the one we see in these sequence working memory tasks. And we can also think of it as a form of planning as inference because I'm sampling from a distribution over these paths, given that my current location is the current location and any future location is the goal location. And then if I have one of these plans, I can move through my plan by, my policy, right, once I have this representation, my policy is just always do whatever it says in subspace 1. That's the next place I should go to solve my problem. And so I can just move to that subspace, and then I reach this new fixed point of the dynamics, which tells me that I'm going to reach the ice cream shop in 4 time steps instead of before in 5 time steps. And so it looks something like this. Initially, activity spreads, and then there's this relaxation to a solution to my planning problem. And then I move through space, and as I do, then my representation updates. So it's always representing the appropriate future from where I am right now. OK, cool. So we might think about why would we want to do something like this? It seems a bit silly, right? We have many planning algorithms with all kinds of guarantees, and a lot of them are more efficient, for example, in terms of the number of neurons, right? For this planning algorithm to work, I need to have a copy of a map of the world for every point in time in the future, right? So if I want to plan 10 time steps into the future, I need 10 maps of the world, and I need to wire them up according to the transition structure of the world, which seems difficult. So one question is, how would you even build that kind of map, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end. Another question is, why would you do this over something like a successor representation? And one reason you might want to do it is one reason is that we think this is what frontal representations look like, and we're trying to figure out what the brain does. We're not trying to do AI. We're just using it as inspiration. Another is that if you're planning in a changing world, then something like a successive representation or a lot of sampling algorithms are not super appropriate. So imagine a world in which I'm still this mouse here, but now instead of going to the ice cream shop to buy an ice cream, I want to go to the ice cream truck and buy an ice cream. And this is a very important distinction, right? Because the ice cream truck moves. But if we imagine that I can predict the dynamics of the ice cream truck, and so I know where it's going to be at every point in time, remember these different subspaces correspond to the state of the world at a point in the future, right? So I can know that the ice cream truck starts in the upper right corner, then it drives left, then it drives down to the right, and it keeps going down again. OK, and I want to intercept this ice cream truck at some point to buy myself an ice cream. Now, you might think that it would be, you could just follow a greedy policy, right? At any point, move towards the ice cream truck. And if you imagine that hypothetical future and you plug it into this kind of representation, it would look like this, right? You just keep going towards the ice cream truck. But you'll realize that you never reach the ice cream truck. And that means that this is not going to be a stable fixed point of the network dynamics. And the intuition here is that given the parameters that we have, a neuron stays active if it gets 2 sources of input, and it decays down if it only gets 1 source of input. And so you need to anchor the end of your path to an external input from your goal in order to remain active, in order for this to be a fixed point of the dynamics. If instead you think about this non-greedy path, which goes around the obstacle to then intercept the ice cream truck in 4 time steps in the future, then this is a fixed point of the network dynamics. And so if we run our dynamics, then initially activity spreads, you resolve possible plans, and you converge to a fixed point, which is the correct one. And then as the ice cream truck starts driving, you can intercept it, and you can buy your ice cream. That's one example of why this might be possible. And this is a thing that happens a lot in the world, right? Because the world is changing all the time. And also every time we interact with people, then they're going to be changing over time. They're going to make different activities. If you're playing a game of chess, then people are going to make different moves and stuff like that. And so it's really, really important for people and animals to be able to plan in a changing world. The other thing we might wonder about is how do we plan in really large state spaces, right? Because I just told you that you need one map of the world for every step in the future that you want to plan over. So if I want to solve this planning problem, which the solution has length, I think, 50, then that's not great. But even if you used a different representation, then planning over very long sequences can be quite difficult, and it can help to be hierarchical in your planning process. So if we imagine we took this map of the world, this could be something like Rome, and we chunked it up into different neighborhoods. Now the planning problem is a lot easier, even just visually, if you're in the audience, to see that you have to move from brown to kind of bluish to green to blue to purple, right? You can kind of look at the sequence of neighborhoods you have to walk through, and this only has length 8. And so that's a lot easier. And we can run the same kind of algorithm as before, but now each neuron represents not a single location in this 100-dimensional space on the left. It represents a single neighborhood in the 13-dimensional space on the right. And you can run these planning dynamics, and you'll converge to a fixed point of the dynamics. So here I've visualized the converged dynamics in the full 100-dimensional space by taking a neuron in the 13-dimensional space representing a neighborhood and projecting that neighborhood onto my 100-dimensional map, right? So each slice here is 13-dimensional, not 100-dimensional. And you'll realize that you can find out the sequence of neighborhoods you have to walk through. But maybe it's difficult even to find your way through a single neighborhood, right? Going from the first slice to the second slice could be difficult if that itself requires a long sequence of actions. But what you can do now is you can stack these types of planning algorithms in a hierarchy where what you're really trying to do is you're trying to reach the neighborhood in subspace 1 from the neighborhood in subspace 0, as you can treat that subspace 1 neighborhood as a goal for a lower level planner, which implements the same algorithm, but now at a higher level of granularity. And then eventually you reach that new neighborhood, right? So you shift your plan in the abstract space, and then you can replan in the primitive space. And it looks like this. You plan, then you plan in the primitive space, then you follow your primitive plan, then you shift your plan in the abstract space, and you just keep going. And this is really useful because before, we needed a number of neurons that was linear in the length, in the planning length, right? So like, given a finite set of neurons n, then the length of a plan we could construct was order n. But now if we stack these, we can actually we can come up with plans that are exponentially long in the number of neurons that we have. Which is obviously useful if we're planning something like, how do I get back from Rome? Well, I'm going to like go to the airport, then fly to London, then, you know, right? All these things you can basically plan on an abstract level and then sequence out that plan at lower and lower levels of granularity. And this provides kind of a biologically plausible implementation of this kind of planning. OK, so I've talked a lot about this idea we have, which again was inspired by some biological data in sequence working memory tasks, and is trying to solve a planning problem. But does it have anything to do with what the brain does when you're actually planning in real life? And so fortunately, we have a lot of excellent experimental collaborators, like Peter Doohan here in Thomas Ackham's lab in Oxford, who are actually recording from medial prefrontal cortex of animals solving these kinds of large navigation tasks requiring sequences of many decisions. And you might hope I'm going to tell you that when you look in the brain, it looks the same as this model, but I'm not, because we don't know yet. So this is really, you know, we took inspiration from the data, we've built up a model, and now we're going to go test it in these kinds of tasks. And the only bit of information we have right now is that one thing we know is that there is kind of an increase in global activity during this planning phase in the model, right, when you explore the set of possible solutions to your planning problem. And we know that this happens in the biological data as well. But we don't know yet what is the content of neural activity during this peak in activity during the planning phase. And we don't know. Oops, I pressed something wrong again, I think. All right, and we also don't know what's the information that's stored in this period during the actual movement phase. Cool. And so that's something we're going to start looking at now to try to refine this computational and theoretical model that we have, which surely will be wrong along many axes, but hopefully right along some axes as well. And so in summary, what we have is this idea of how you might go about solving these sequential planning tasks by learning a structure of the world in the hippocampus, and then projecting that model of the world up to frontal cortex together with information about what goal you're trying to get to, for example, an ice cream shop from OFC, and that allows you to solve the planning problem in frontal cortex, potentially at multiple different levels of a hierarchy until you can propagate the information all the way back to motor cortex to actually learn what to do. And of course, there are many challenges here, such as how on earth do you learn the structure of the world in frontal cortex? And one option is that you could imagine, you know, exploring the world during the day, during the night, you could replay out different events from hippocampus, right? And that could be used to build this map that's required to construct your attractor circuit in frontal cortex. And so we also have Beatriz Godinho from the lab recording activity in hippocampus during this maze navigation task, and hopefully we'll be able to also integrate that into our thinking about how animals go about solving these difficult decision-making tasks. And so with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone involved, especially Tim Behrens, who was really the driving force for this thing, as well as many other people in the lab who've been involved in various stages of the projects, contributing ideas and data and working on related projects. And thank you also to the organizers for inviting me, and to everyone for coming and paying attention.
Thank you very much for the amazing talk. I was wondering, have you analyzed your algorithm from parallel computing and neuromorphic computing kind of point of view? I'm wondering which part of the planning algorithm can be parallelized and which parts needs to be sequential.
Yeah, so we haven't thought about this from a neuromorphic computing point of view, but in theory, everything should be able to work in parallel. This is very much a parallel planning algorithm in contrast to many models of planning based on rollouts. And so I see no reason that it shouldn't be possible to just run the whole thing in parallel on a single chip, which would be the same way we think about frontal cortex as solving the planning problem in a kind of amortized, simultaneous way rather than a sequential way. And so I think that should definitely be possible.
Great talk. Right here. Great talk. Thank you so much. So I have a question about, so did I get it correctly that if this framework is correct, then the representations that you found, like the kind of orthogonal subspaces that encode different kind of target locations, they should like kind of change after the first kind of saccade is made? Or are you thinking of that as like a intermediate representation that is then transferred into a different part of the brain and is used for action? So that's one question. The second is that can you somehow show that these representations are used actually for the kind of final decision making, or yeah?
Yeah, so the idea would be that that this representation remains in frontal cortex to guide the plan. And so it's true that a given subspace would represent not a given point in time or a given location, kind of absolute space, in absolute like time throughout your plan, but it would always be relative to where you are. And so subspace 3 would always tell you where you should be in 3 time steps. And so that would change as you move through your plan. Initially, it would be the thing that's actually initially 3 away. Then you move 1. Now it would be the thing that was originally 4 away, but now it's 3 away. And the other question was, I forgot that already. Oh yeah, can you show that this actually influences behavior? So Mohammadi El-Gabi, in his work on a more sequence working memory type task, they found representation that looks something like this, and they were able to show that when the animal had multiple different paths it could take, if you looked in these subspaces that putatively represent the future intentions of the animal, then they could predict which of those possible paths the animal is going to take. And so I think that's at the moment the strongest evidence we have that these kind of representations might be useful in guiding behavior.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, we're going to move on. Thanks, Kris, again.